Get started then. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Mission Driven Made podcast. I want to welcome Brittyn Coleman to the show, also known as the Autism Dietitian. How's it going today?
It's great. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, it's great to have you on. And before we get started today, I did want to just start by saying thank you for all the work you do. I truly mean that. And as you know, I have a daughter with autism who's almost 4 years old, and the list of things that she deals with because of her autism, it would be pages and pages to be able to describe that. So thank you so much for what you do. I truly mean that. I don't feel like people understand, the work that you're doing and how important it is.
Thank you so much. I that truly means the world to me.
Yeah, of course. And so on the show, I know we were talking offline a little bit about this, but we talk about and focus on people taking action and living mission-driven lives. So your mission, helping people with autism, that's going to be a big part of the show. But before we get there, I kind of want to understand your beginning, a little bit about your upbringing, if you don't mind, and then how that led you to becoming the autism dietitian.
Absolutely. So I think many people know that I have a brother on the spectrum, and if they don't, I will absolutely share about that now. So he's 2 years younger than me, and he was diagnosed at 2. So I was pretty young whenever he was diagnosed with autism. So that's, growing up, autism was, I never knew my brother without autism because I was so young. And so I think that it was a very unique childhood. Bonding with him, having a younger sibling on the spectrum meant going to his therapies and, meeting him where he's at. I was involved in his different therapies, his speech therapist or speech therapy, his OT. I mean, they always really involved me in it, which is great because that was a really special way that I could connect with him and learn to communicate with him better. So growing up with a brother on the spectrum, it taught me so much about, taught me to be a better dietitian, to serve the families that I now work with so much better because I understand where they're coming from. It totally taught me to view life in a different way too. And I think I also have a little bit of an interesting piece. My mom is a psychologist, and even before she had my brother, was working to diagnose kids with autism. She worked with kids with autism even before. And so she was able to recognize those early signs. And so she knew the therapies. It's kind of like a little shortcut. She already knew a lot about autism and what early interventions to get enrolled in. So we had a lot of conversations about, having a brother on the spectrum and, growing up, I knew that I likely wanted to work with kids on the spectrum too and help guide families. And I never really knew what that meant until I was in school to become a dietitian. And it just, all of it fell in place for me. I just knew that I could combine my love for nutrition with autism. And when I would share that with, you kind of go around the group and say, what kind of nutrition do you want to go into? And there's diabetes, there's renal disease, there's all of these different areas. And I would share autism, and everyone would kind of look at me like I was crazy and just be like, well, why is that needed? And I don't think you truly see it unless you're there, unless you experience that, because so many kids struggle with nutrition on a daily basis. And so I specialized in autism, did my thesis in autism and nutrition, and now have run my private practice for nearly 5 years and work with kids on the spectrum daily and help families navigate the space of nutrition, which is so confusing and overwhelming, and just help them take the guesswork out of it and be more confident in how to use it to help their children feel their best.
And kind of zooming back into your childhood a little bit, did you, with everything that you were going through with your brother and assisting with all his therapies, did you see all these things as unique? Like, did you know this was, not something that everyone else was a part of or dealt with?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I never really questioned it just because that was my reality. That was just how it was for us. This is just how Barrett is. This is the therapies he goes to. And I didn't have any friends who had brothers on the spectrum either. I mean, siblings on the spectrum. So it wasn't really, it's interesting you say that. I just really never questioned it. But I think my parents talked about it in such a way that it was very approachable and I could ask those questions. I shared about it in classrooms, about my brother with my friends. And so it was just like a very normal part of my childhood. I mean, of course, my life now, but at the time I didn't feel that it was that different, which I mean, I think maybe attests to the way that my parents normalized it and talked about it.
Could you kind of share a little bit about his progression? So he was diagnosed early, just like Elsie was as well, up until, I don't know, maybe your teenage years, like what that looked like for you.
Yeah. So yeah, he was diagnosed around 2. He was nonverbal until he was 4 or 5. It's hard for me to remember because I was so young. And I mean, I say he makes progress every day. Even now, I mean, he's 26 now, and I get off the phone with him sometimes. I'm like, wow, what he just asked me or what we just talked about, I mean, that was progress. And so it looks different all the time. And as you know, it looks different for everybody on the spectrum, but it's, incredible. The social piece I see really has progressed for him maybe later in life. A lot of people struggle with that, social piece. And for him, I've seen a lot of progress in his like social skills over the past like 5 years, especially 5 to 10 years.
And what was it like when you first kind of heard him start communicating? Do you remember that moment at all?
I know stories, but for some reason I think back on that and I can't even remember those small little details. I wish I did. But I remember like stories that my parents would share, but I don't remember much of it. I do remember like learning how to communicate with him when he wasn't able to communicate well, and advocating for him as his older sister. I mean, we were in school at the same time. So we were in elementary school at the same time. We went to different middle schools. I transferred to another school, but I remember in elementary school, kind of being the person that would speak for him or that would advocate for him when I saw him in the hallways or talk to my friends about him. So I remember some pieces. I wish I remembered it all.
And when did you know? Because you said like you knew you wanted to do something, with autism later on and helping out people in that community. Do you remember the moment where you felt like this was like your mission or part of your big purpose in life?
I feel like I didn't truly realize that it was my mission until I was in college. It felt very natural for me to work with kids with disabilities, and I always, volunteered with Special Olympics or, was just involved in developmental disorders. And so it was just something that was always really natural to me. But actually growing up, I really wanted to be a veterinarian. That was my thing. I mean, it took me through high school, I was convinced. But I was like, what do I do with this piece? Because I would love to work with families who have kids with disabilities. And then I think in college, I kind of put it all together, still being in the healthcare field and the working with humans and then helping other families too.
Awesome. And can you kind of take us through your experience and challenges going through schooling? Because you have your master's, correct, in nutritional sciences?
Correct. That's right.
So can you kind of take us through that experience for you if you faced any challenges and then, if you had to overcome anything?
Definitely. So I started off and I got my bachelor's of science in nutritional sciences. It looks a little different now to get your RD, which is your registered dietitian, or RD stands for registered dietitian. So now they're requiring you to have a master's, whereas when I went through, you weren't required to have a master's at the time. And so a lot of people would stop at their bachelor's, but I was not done. I was like, I need to research more. I want to go deeper. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for me to get my master's. So I continued on and, going into disabilities, pediatrics, there's really not a lot of guidance about that in school. And so I kind of had to pave my own path, getting different internships, doing different, experiences while I was in school, rotations, wherever I could to get some kind of experience with kids, and especially, pediatrics with developmental disabilities. It's just very, very few and far between to get that kind of experience. Autism was never once mentioned in the curriculum. Pediatrics is
Wow.
hardly mentioned. And so I think my class got an earful because every project that we could potentially do, I did it on autism and diet. And so I think my class, there's actually one other person who went on to specialize in autism too, which is really cool. And so they definitely got an earful from me about it. And I was really lucky to have a mentor who had a son with cerebral palsy and was really involved in developmental disorders. He was the chair for this internship at my school called LIND, which stands for Leadership in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, basically. And so I worked under him, and he was incredible. And he was my thesis mentor and just really helped me pave the way, and really let me take the lead on this when not many people were doing that.
And something I've wondered, because I didn't really understand until, the last few years, how nutrition plays a role in all this, or assisting, especially kids with autism. Why is this not such a known thing? That question might be a little ambiguous, but I can't figure out why, if there's so much benefit from, I mean, not just nutrition with, kids with disabilities, this is everyone, but why specifically with kids with disabilities, autism specifically, why is this information not known? I feel like you are one of the few people that are talking about it.
Yeah. I'm going to try not to point fingers.
You can point away all you want.
There really is a lot of research about it. And but in the research world, 20 years isn't a long time. And that's when a lot of this research really picked up, was in 2000, when it came to nutrition for autism. Now we have studies back in the 70s talking about the gut and diet for autism. Now there's not a ton, but there is some there. And so the research really picked up about 20 years ago. Now the difficulty is to get this research and curriculum, or this research into the curriculum of med schools, into the curriculum of nutrition schools, you name it, it takes a lot longer than that. And so unfortunately, there's a lot of practicing healthcare providers who this has not been worked into their curriculum, or they're not affected. I mean, I can attest to that myself. It wasn't included in my curriculum either, but I went to research. I found the research. I had that personal connection that helped, give me that drive. And so unfortunately, there's just a lot of healthcare practitioners out there that haven't done that kind of research. And then when they're not aware of the research, they just knock it down. And so I have so many parents who tell me they go to their PCP or their pediatrician and say, what do you think about nutrition for autism, or trying a gluten-free diet, or my kid's such a picky eater, and they're like, doesn't matter. And they're like, even bringing research studies, and they're just like, it doesn't matter, doesn't make a difference. And it's so frustrating, because that's the person you trust to guide you through all of this, through a diagnosis. And if that first person is knocking you down and saying that it doesn't matter, well, a lot of people aren't going to go much further than that. So unfortunately, I mean, if it were something that were mentioned when you got a diagnosis, hey, this is something you should pay attention to nutrition, or a lot of kids with autism are picky eaters, you might consider feeding therapy, all of these things be such a different story. And so I'm hopeful. I think there's a lot of obviously there's a lot of research going on right now with nutrition for autism. That's what I share in my Autism Nutrition Library. My membership is basically just breaking down all the research for parents to make it less overwhelming. But it's there if you just look, and you don't even have to look that hard. It's like, if you it's there. So I'm hopeful that our healthcare system will catch up to that, and that it's not going to be that rare anymore, that it's going to be a standard practice.
And I think it's awesome, by the way, you're saying there wasn't much curriculum for that when you were going through school, but you went and found it. What do you mean by that? And I think that's amazing that you did that, because obviously you had to take action and be very purpose driven to go do that. So what did that actually look like, you finding it?
I mean, thankfully I was given the opportunity in school. It's like you have so many papers, you have, your thesis, all of these things where you get to choose a lot of times what you're going to research. And so I had an excuse to go and do this research. And so I was expected to do that and sift through this research, what is helpful, what is not. And so I already had a topic in mind that I was very interested in. And so I had an excuse to dig deeper in the research. And that's really what got me started. And, even at the time, I think when I first got started, like sifting through all of the information out there, I didn't realize how much there was starting out. I mean, I knew that it was helpful. I knew that my brother saw success with dietary change, and that so many other people did too. But being able to see all of that research there in front of me was and to see it grow so much, even over the past just 5 years, it's really exciting. But I did have to, learn how to read research, what is going to be the best type of research studies, looking at participants, looking at your controls, looking to see how the research was structured, the research study was structured. So there's a lot that goes into that. And sometimes it's not very accessible to just the general public if you don't know how to do all of that.
And through all your research, and this could even be from before you went to school all the way up till present day, is there anything that you felt like you had a complete 180, like mindset or perception shift regarding nutrition, that you were just kind of blown away, like, wow, this is not what I expected?
That's a great question. I think one thing, I mean, let me think. One thing that I went into it, I think in the very beginning, I had a little bit of a black or white mindset, meaning that
right,
if you go gluten, dairy free, you're going to see progress. Or if you try this supplement, you're going to see progress. And I think over the years, and this takes like clinical judgment to come into it as well, it's just made me see that there is so much diversity here. There's no one approach for anyone. And so reading this research with that in mind as well is like, yeah, we see progress. Sometimes it's in a subset of kids, and it makes me think, what else can we do to help figure out how is something going to be successful? What are the things that are most likely to be helpful? And so I think I had that little bit of mindset change. And sometimes, you look online and it is pretty, it makes it seem like, if you're not seeing progress, you're doing it wrong. And that's not the case. I unfortunately, there's a lot of blame on parents for that. And it's just, it can be crazy out there. So there's no one size fits all. You can take gradual changes and still see progress. It makes you think you have to do everything perfectly to see progress. And that's not the case. So I think it's just, opened my eyes how to make this doable, even just starting with the very basics.
And so it kind of seems like coaching's a little bit of a science mixed with an art at the same time.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information that we have. And like I said, based on the child, there are certain things that can be really helpful. There are certain things we definitely want to do just for proper nutrition for kids across the board. We want them to get their nutrients, their fiber, their protein. There are things that we clearly need to survive and thrive. But there are other things that kids with autism really can benefit from. And there's this huge expectation for parents in general, especially for kids with or parents who have kids with autism, to be perfect and to have this perfect diet. It's all homemade. It's no processing, no sugar, no added ingredients. And it just makes it so what's the word? Just kind of threatening to start. It's like, do I have to go from 0 to 60? But no, you can start like little things at a time. And so a lot of parents come to me and they're like, I have to do everything now. And I'm like, you actually don't have to. Like, let's break it down and make this doable. Because if you start everything 0 to 60, you're going to burn out in like a month. And we don't want this to burn out. We want this to be a sustainable lifestyle change. And so that's definitely where coaching and learning to coach people to make this a sustainable change and try and reduce overwhelm as much as possible.
Can you take us through any client that you've had and kind of the transformation from maybe, I don't know, it could be behavior, it could be from communication, whatever it is. Obviously no need to say names or anything like that, but just from when you first saw them to what they looked like after you worked with them?
How much time do you have? Because I keep track of my clients' progress. I have a huge Excel sheet that I keep track of everything that my clients tell me, report. We do like weekly check-ins,
Yeah.
Whether it's in my group program or I've worked with clients privately in the past, and or progress that people just send to me on Instagram that they followed some advice and they have progress. So it's incredible. And we just were able to put everything all together in one place because I had it all over the place. So it's really exciting to be able to see all of this in one place. So, I mean, I have so many clients who see progress with gastrointestinal symptoms. So many kids are prone to GI issues, like constipation is the number one, but I do see a lot of kids with looser stools and abdominal discomfort, and a lot of parents reporting, I see when my child isn't constipated or when my child isn't having these chronic gut issues, I see so much improvement in behavior and social interaction, their mood, and which makes sense if they're uncomfortable. But we also know the gut is so important. Like what's inside your gut is so important to your brain. So see a ton of progress there. Lots of progress in picky eating. I mean, my two specialties are picky eating and gut issues. So, that's what I'm coaching parents through, and seeing kids expand from 5 foods to 10 foods, doubling and going on from there, seeing some kids, accepting 20 foods to begin with and doubling from there. So it depends on the person, different people starting at different places, but I mean, it's incredible to watch these parents, do the work. I can give all the information in the world, but for them to implement it and see this kind of change is incredible.
In a picky eating thing, that's probably pretty common, right? I mean, that Elsie, that's one of her biggest things. She only wants to eat fruit and drink milk. Like she doesn't want anything else.
Yeah. Picky eating is 5 to 8 times more likely in kids with autism than without autism. So,
wow.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of advice for just picky eaters that is not good advice for picky eaters with autism. And one of those that it just kills me every time is like the starve it out method, where pediatricians are just like, well, just stop feeding them all these foods and they'll eat eventually. It's like, that's actually not the case, because a lot of these kids have sensory issues and they're not eating because they have a sensory issue, and that's not going to go away if they're hungry. It's going to probably make it worse.
Right.
And so I coach parents on how to introduce new foods to kids with autism, making it, in a way that we can help kids gain confidence and trust with their caregiver and not cause these negative, stressful associations with food. But it takes time. I mean, I'll tell you that it's not something that resolves overnight. Definitely takes consistency.
And I want to transition just into a question about more on the business side. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like building your brand?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I feel like I rarely talk about this on podcasts too. It definitely was a work in progress. I mean, I am a dietitian. I didn't go to business school. At this point, I feel like I have my MBA, I have my CPA. It feels like I have all of these things at this point, just because a lot of it is just learning as you go. And so you open your private practice typically or a business because you are like, I want to do what I love to do. But then there's all these other pieces too, right? Like marketing and advertising, like web design, billing. I mean, there's just so much that customer support, all these things that you're like, wait, I didn't sign up for this part. I wanted to work with parents who with kids with autism, and now I'm dealing with all this on the back end. So it was definitely a work in progress, getting my systems in place. I worked with multiple business coaches to get me where I am, and each of them got me to a really special place in my business. So I'm very grateful for them. And it definitely takes time. It's not built overnight either. And I was trying to think, I think I said 5 years earlier. I think it's been four and a half, not quite 5. But I mean, I'm developing all the time and just trying to figure out how can I serve as many people as possible across all stages of life, financial ability to invest in, these different resources for their kids' health, and just trying to reach as many people as possible. And it's hard to serve everybody, but it's one of my goals to help as many families as I can as possible.
And one more question about your business. Was there anything throughout this whole learning process, the last around 5 years, you said, business related, that you just don't like at all?
Oh, I have an incredible assistant, and I owe so much to her because I hate doing a lot of things in the business. Like, and I just love being able to work with families, and that's what I want to do. So all the other stuff, I'm just like, I'm just so grateful for her, to help me with some of that. I have learned with my personality, I am a very social person. I love people, but working privately, like one-on-one with families, I was at one point ready to throw in a towel because I was so burnt out. And so I've really had to figure out what works with my personality, what's sustainable for me, and where I don't compromise my health or my mental health, helping others. My clients are only going to be, as good as I am as well, if I can serve them the best to my ability. And so I've had to figure out ways that are more sustainable for me to help as many people as possible. And that now involves my membership and my group coaching programs, and working with a very limited number of private clients, eventually even just exclusively working with group and membership. So I've learned that about my personality, and it's a work in progress, and made a big switch this year to, make sure that I'm honoring my mental health and my health in general to serve others better.
And if people are looking to connect with you, or if they want to join the membership program or any of those services that you offer, where can they go to do that?
Yeah. Well, first I would say follow me on Instagram, and you can learn a little bit more about my approach and a lot of what I have to say about nutrition for autism. That's of course free. Then I have my membership called the Autism Nutrition Library, and the goal of the library is to help overwhelmed parents feel less overwhelmed, to understand what the research says, to be guided by a healthcare practitioner, not all these crazy things online, and to just get support and feel confident to implement nutrition for autism. So that's called the Autism Nutrition Library. You can either click on the link in my bio on my Instagram, or you can just go to autismnutritionlibrary.com. And then lastly, if you do want to go one step further and get a little bit more support with picky eating or gut issues, I do host group coaching programs, and those are called the Nursing Autism Method. And I enroll a limited number of families, typically every 6 to 8 weeks, to work in that program together. And you can find more information on that at autismdietitian.com.
Awesome. I will definitely link all of those in the show description for the show. And I do have one last question for you. This is going to be the last part of the show. I want to give you the floor again for a couple minutes. So I feel like just about everyone in life, they have like their thing, or they're looking for their thing, or their mission or purpose, whatever you want to call it. And yours is so clear, at least from an outsider looking in. So if someone is trying to find that thing, if you will, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah. I think it's going to be different for everyone. I mean, for me, it's maybe a little bit more clear because I've gone through an experience. I've been able to have this experience to help other people. And a lot of times that mission that you're driven by is something that you're personally affected by. So sharing with others how you got through a certain situation, and, if you've developed framework around it, how to help them go through that journey, something that you've already been through without a guidebook, and give them a guidebook to it. For people who maybe haven't experienced something, maybe it's something that you're just genuinely interested in. I have colleagues who work in a certain field and they're not personally affected by it, but it's something that they've, researched and gained so much information about, and just feel very in love with that topic. So it's not always something that you have to go through yourself. I think that definitely adds a layer to it. But I think sometimes it takes time to niche down into what your field is, what your mission is. And again, one of those other things that doesn't happen overnight, it's a lot of times years and years in the making.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you everyone for tuning into the Mission Driven Made podcast. And if you found value today in the show, or if it made you think a little bit more, which I know it did, subscribe to the show and leave us a 5-star review. And thank you so much, Brittyn, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be on the show today and for all the value that you brought the listeners. And until next time, everyone, stay mission driven. And done.